Welcome to EFT Nation, your home for all things tapping. For show notes and resources, please visit EFTtappingtraining.com. We are your tapping hosts. I'm Alina Frank.
And I'm Craig Wiener. The information provided in this podcast is not a substitute for counseling or medical advice. The information presented here is meant to inspire and educate listeners, but are not guarantees of any kind.
EFT for weight loss.
Big one. I think it's actually one of the most searched for on Google topics that people look for EFT. It's probably one of the largest specialties because there's so much relevant regarding the emotional aspects of weight gain, weight holding, issues around weight loss, and all of those things. So it just felt like the right time, especially given that it's January, to do that. I think there's something about January and that fresh new calendar and the whole resolution thing. It's like, okay, flipping the chart, this is the year that I'm going to make a difference with regard to my weight, because it is a big issue with regard to health and well-being and self-image and, our weight. Boy, there's just such a kind of morphic field around that, isn't there?
Definitely.
Okay. Before we start, I just want to say that that this should not be a substitute for medical care and evaluation. In other words, there are all kinds of problems that could be happening with thyroid and pituitary and diabetes and a lot of different physiological, pathological, physical conditions that we need to get checked out, as well as dealing with the emotional aspects of weight gain, challenges with weight loss, etc. So please do that.
Or serious psychological problems with eating disorders.
Sure. Depression,
yes,
often associated with weight loss. So, weight gain, challenges with weight loss is a complex issue.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about it from various viewpoints, like from the practitioner working with this issue to if you're just listening and want some help around it yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're a practitioner, I think one of the most important things is know your scope.
Oh, yeah.
Right? In other words, are you giving nutritional advice and you have no training in nutrition other than the book you read, the diet information that you've done personally yourself, right? So please know your scope. And when you're working with somebody around their concerns with regard to weight gain, weight loss, etc., remember that as an EFT practitioner, if that's just what your training is, then your training is in working with tapping and EFT with regard to the emotional issues around that, not physically working on their health, their weight loss, etc. Right? So know the scope and know your focus and keep in your lane.
Right. So you mean like I can't share this magic pill that works for me, or
that's pretty extreme and an obvious
cocktail,
no. But it can get much trickier than that. Can't you just tell somebody that they should take this particular B vitamin? Shouldn't you just tell somebody, they should try and they should go on a keto diet and you don't know anything about their health history?
No.
Right? So
it's one of the things, it's one of the easiest ways to go down that slippery slope is this topic.
Yeah, because people that are struggling with this issue are often not necessarily desperate, but it's such a hot button item that they're looking for advice. So it needs to be up to you as the practitioner how you draw the line as far as quote unquote advice versus facilitating, teaching, healing EFT and what you're working with.
Right, and you can have very strong opinions.
Right.
Either way. I mean, like on all of it, you could be, don't you just want to accept yourself the way that you are, and that is giving advice. So
stop the advice giving.
Yes, absolutely. It's a real sticky place. They can get you into trouble fast.
But for people that aren't practitioners and they're just listening because they're interested and they Googled EFT for weight loss and this podcast came up, then there are definitely going to be parameters and steps that you should consider, and we're not here to give you advice, nutritional advice or exercise advice or cardio protective advice, any of those things. So
all right, we can share what's worked that we've seen work, and we also have some studies.
Yeah, so it's really interesting when you start to look at people's relationship with food and weight, etc. There's a huge body of research, a lot of it done by Peter Stapleton, Dr. Stapleton at Bond University, around relationship with food, around willpower in food, around food cravings. She's done studies where we've seen functional MRI reducing brain activity that has to do with cravings toward certain sweet foods. We can look to studies that show, for example, people with diabetes, that it's been able to help control glucose. We start to look at, for example, cortisol studies. There's a relationship between increased cortisol and increased belly fat, and we have several studies that show EFT to be effective in reducing cortisol. And we also have a study that there's not a lot of studies that have actually explicitly shown long-term weight loss, but there certainly was one that was a 4-week trial that Dr. Stapleton did where there was an 11-pound weight loss maintained over the course of a year. But things that are associated with eating and fooding, good new word, for example, there was a 4-week trial that they did of online EFT over a month, and things that were measured were things that are called like the power of food, which is the ability of me to make decisions and not have food power over me. Food cravings were down almost 30%. The anxiety around food and physical symptoms around food went down by like 23%. Food, feeling of being able to have self-restraint around food increased by about 13% over the trial. So there's absolutely research, and there's more needed, about one's relationship with food and weight loss, but EFT is showing a lot of effectiveness in this arena. So that's why we're talking about it.
There is a whole episode that we did on cravings.
Yeah, the crave. So we did one that was, let's see, what was that? Episode number 16.
Yep.
So if you're interested in working specifically with cravings, go ahead and listen to episode 16.
Yep. Okay. So I know that when I was working with clients and I really wanted to set them up for success, we would start our work together by having a discussion about the action steps that they could research, which wasn't my lane. It wasn't within my scope to advise them on exercise or eating plans or things like that. So I encourage them to either talk to their doctor or to do a search and figure out what they wanted to do to set them up for success in terms of behavior change.
Yeah, this is a really big one for me. Now, I'm not going to say it's the right way. It's the way that I've worked with clients. If they're saying, for example, and people will come and say, I want to lose 20 pounds.
Right.
Okay. What I know is how many steps that somebody can do in the right direction.
Right.
But because of thyroid and adrenal and other physiological issues, that could take a long time. They could make tremendous progress on getting healthier, but the number on the scale doesn't change. And that can be incredibly disappointing and frustrating.
Yes.
So while I will acknowledge that my client's vision is to lose 20 pounds, and I totally support that that's what they desire, what I'm working towards with them is I ask them, just like you were saying, what are the steps that you want to make or behaviors you want to change or adopt or let go of that you feel are related to your desired outcome?
Sure.
And then we can work to what's in the way of you exercising.
And they could actually explain, like, you can ask the question, what has worked for you in the past?
That's one question.
And to have them think about, like, between now and the time that we start tapping together, I want you to think about the things that you want to set in place. Do you want, and you could share some, for example, just to give them some thoughts. So you could join a gym, you could hire a trainer, you could go to Overeaters Anonymous, you could go to Weight Watchers, you could go to your doctor.
You could add more of this. You could decrease more of that thing. You could stop eating that after a certain time. And so allow them to go, this is something I really want to make a change with, because whatever issues and emotional issues are going to come up as challenges with working towards that.
Right. So,
and they're going to have more control over achieving that behavioral change than necessarily that needle moving on the scale.
Exactly. So if you're listening as just a person wanting to lose weight, think about that first. Make that your first step in the right direction, is really creating that plan for yourself.
And speaking of doing it yourself, I know we have two audiences here, right?
Yes,
we have
we do.
people that are involved with EFT that are practitioners, and we have people that are just tuning in.
Yep.
So one of the things that I just want to emphasize is the importance of self-tapping, right? So if you're obviously just somebody interested, we're talking about self-tapping. But if you're working with a practitioner, you are a practitioner, the importance of a client who's working with weight loss with self-tapping for when they're feeling anxious, stressed, feeling of craving sensation, all of those things in the moment, being able to tap is such a critical part of this, not just like waiting till the next time you see a practitioner to work on it.
You know, I did speaking of that, I did a presentation. I mean, this is right, those one session miracles, or those amazing, crazy stories that you hear, that, you know, make you feel like EFT is the miracle drug. You know, those are the ones that stand out in your mind, not the ones that take, you know, more than just a couple of months of tapping. I remember that this woman showed up to a lecture that I gave on EFT, and she said she had lost 150 pounds completely on her own. And the way she did it was she would tap while she was going grocery shopping. Up and down the aisle, she would tap on herself. Isn't that amazing?
That's great.
Yeah. So that stands out in my mind as like someone that learned how to self-tap, and they were able to do it in the moment when it really counted for them.
Right. And that's actually one possibility when you're noticing yourself vulnerable to wanting to grab something, is just what we call silent tapping.
Yeah.
Right? Just tapping on the points to help regulate yourself, to give you some of that power over food restraint.
Yep.
Right. And, you know, speaking of that, there's what we would talk about as tapping in the moment. Tapping in the moment with what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling really stressed, and I know that when I'm stressed, I go into the cabinet and the fridge and reach for XYZ. So even though right now I'm feeling really stressed about, because my FedEx shipment didn't show up and I really needed that, or whatever is stressful in the moment that may lead you to eating when you don't want to.
Right.
Tapping in the moment, or tapping on present issues, things and stressors that are going on in your life that you know or observe, trigger your tendency to reach for the whatever.
So that's why we're really looking for the patterns, and those are harder to find on your own, and that's the value of working with a real solid practitioner who maybe specializes in this. But I remember a client who, you know, we live on Whidbey Island. There's a 20-minute ferry crossing, and lots of people commute. And I was working with a client, and we identified that her pattern was that she would go after work. So no problem on the weekends, no problem in the mornings, no problem during the day. She ate what she wanted to, no problem, and she felt that it was pretty healthy. She would get home from work, drive off the ferry, drive home, go directly to her refrigerator and eat everything that was junk food in there, and then start making dinner. And she knew that was the problem. And I said, well, isn't that interesting? Monday through Friday this happens. It doesn't happen on the weekend. What do you think the stressor is? And she said, well, obviously must be work. And I said, okay. So in the ferry, in your car, nobody cares. You sit down and you tap on every stressful thing that happened at work before you get home. And if you still have more tapping to do after the 20-minute ferry crossing, go to a parking lot, park there and tap on everything that's stressful that happened at work that day before you get home. She was able to reach her ideal weight just doing that.
That's great. And you know what, it's interesting also, what foods you might reach for.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
The pattern could be
the patterns of
the sweet.
Seeking sweetness.
Yes.
Seeking comfort.
Nurturing.
Right? The feeling of certain foods that nurture me. The feeling of being filled. Right? Because of the triggers around what it feels like and how I feel empty in my life. How I feel a lack of sweetness and nurturance in my life. So we may not be making the direct relationship and connection in our mind.
Yes.
But on an emotional and energetic level, they're there. And that's where the tapping helps to tune us in. So that's where we start to even look at history, right? And the history of our patterns. Because if you're dealing with this, for most people, it probably isn't just current. Now, for some of you, it might be. There might have been some stressful event, and then, you know, in COVID, you gained that 10 pounds, or the first year of college or whatever. So it might have been recent. But for many people, this has been a lifelong issue and therefore has a lot of history. And when you have a lot of history and repetition of something that doesn't work and failures, guess what gets created from that?
Beliefs.
Yeah.
Right. So, what I wanted to back up and say is that go and listen to the episode that we did on how to just do basic EFT and identify the feeling of anxiety, stress, frustrated, anger that's driving you. We call these the drivers eating and to the challenges that you have. So let's go on to you have exploring those patterns. You could keep a journal. You could keep a journal of the things that you eat, not so that you can feel ashamed of it, and that's a tappable issue, but so that you can see, you write down, who was I with? Who was I just talking to? Who did I just hear from? And I know that Gene Montreselli does that with his clients through.
Okay. Yeah, because I always say people have their known cues, their known triggers, their known associations.
Yes.
What we want to start to explore is which ones you're not aware of.
Exactly.
Right? And you haven't made that connection with yet. So getting back to the beliefs, when we've had a lot of repetitions of failures, of diets we tried or times we tried to lose weight, and maybe we did, but then we gained it back, etc. The more of those that have, we develop these limiting beliefs. What would you say are the ones that you've seen the most?
I can't. It's too hard.
It's just too hard. Why bother? Okay.
I've always failed in the past.
Yeah. So in the future, if I failed that many times, it's likely to fail again.
Right. It runs in my family.
Yeah.
My genes.
The genetics.
I can't do
it's
it.
in my genes. All the la-da-da in my family have all been whatever.
I'll lose it, but I'll gain it back.
Exactly. So why even try, and why? So these lead to what we talked to, those secondary gains.
So hold on. How do you work with those beliefs?
Oh, how do you work with the beliefs? Well, here's what's going to be least likely to work. Even though I've always failed in the past, I deeply and completely accept myself.
Why? So somebody that's listening and that's brand new to EFT or hasn't heard it from our perspective, what about that is wrong?
Yeah. So what we really want to do is when we tap on something that large, or often it's called that global, it can really be and feel overwhelming. And feels like we're not going to make any progress because it's so big and there's so many examples and so many times that it happened that, it's almost like deluding myself that I can work on something that big right now and make a real difference.
Well, the thing is, I've seen people feel temporarily better about it.
Okay.
In the moment, I feel like that's gone. I guarantee you it's not gone. You've got lots of events that hold up what we call the tabletop. The belief is the tabletop is, I've always failed in the past. Identify what those table legs are. How did you fail in the past? When did you fail in the past?
What happened?
Thinking about that time that you failed in the past, how does it make you feel? You've got to get more specific than that.
Give me an example of the last time that you tried and you regained it back. Or
Exactly.
what happened that then caused you to gain it back. What changed,
thinking about starting working out on Monday with your trainer and you failed in the past, how does that feel?
Right. Because there's only 3 time zones we can tap on. How I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
How I'm feeling about things that have happened in the past and examples, or how I'm thinking about something coming up. I've got the summer coming up, and how am I going to look at the wedding? I've got a da-da-da-da-da. All those things that are future facing as well.
Exactly.
And those can be anxiety producing even more than in the present moment.
Yep. Okay, so another big area to look at and explore when we're talking about weight loss is something called secondary gains. So we have, go back and listen to episode 13, which is Psychological Reversal, the Good, Bad, and the Ugly. Really good program. People really enjoy that because there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding about what secondary gains are. So I want you to talk about the Felitti ACEs connection to secondary gains. I think that's a good way to explain it in a very clear example.
Okay. So what you're referring to is Dr. Felitti and Dr. Anda, who were the creators of the original Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And how that's related is that early study that was at Kaiser in Southern California was it was a trial, an obesity trial for people that were very, very heavy and working to lose weight, and it was a program for weight loss. And it was going very well. In the protocols that we're using. But what Dr. Felitti noticed was that many of the people that were losing the most weight, they were the most successful, were the first ones dropping out of the program.
Yes.
Which made no sense. If you're doing so well, why would you stop?
Right.
And so we started to do a personal interview with some of these people, and then it got more in depth. And what they discovered, which was, it's not new to us now, but then was just eye-opening, was that many of the early people that were leaving, that were losing weight the quickest, had a history of early childhood trauma, especially sexual trauma. So what was happening was, as they were losing this weight, what was starting to happen in the world was they started to get noticed. They started to have comments about how they looked, etc., and started to bring up very deep feelings of lack of safety, of not feeling comfortable in their own skin. And that's what weight loss was bringing on. So they dropped out of the program. Weren't making all the same connections and not understanding it all. And certainly he didn't as well. And that's where they began to look at these childhood traumas in relationship to this. So that's a very common one with weight losses. So the secondary gain is, on one hand, I'm doing everything to lose weight. I'm working hard with my calorie restriction and my exercise and changing behaviors. And maybe I'm making progress, and then suddenly I lose inspiration. I lose energy for it. Or I start adopting a behavior that some would call self-sabotaging. That gets in the way of my progress. And part of me is going, why would I do that to myself? Why would I blow this? I was doing so well. Because on a subconscious level, there's a part of us that wasn't feeling comfortable, safe. It was creating difficulties and challenges that on an emotional level were bigger and more important for my feeling of survival than the actual weight loss.
I've actually seen people that are on a plan, on some kind of plan, they're losing weight and they stop losing weight. They hit a major plateau, or they gain weight, even though they've done absolutely nothing wrong with their program. And that's when we might start investigating what might the secondary gains be. So a really good way to identify secondary gain is to close your eyes, or have your client close their eyes, and imagine themselves at their goal weight. And how does that feel to be at that weight, looking at themselves? How do people around them act, behave? What do they think about them? What are they saying about them reaching that goal weight? Very likely those secondary gains, those fears start to come up, which are all tappable.
Sure. So as some of those that could come up is, now that I'm getting all this attention, now people expect this of me. Or as I lose weight, wow, the pressure to maintain that. That just feels just too big.
Buying the cost of buying new clothes, the cost of relationship losses. People won't like me, or I'll lose my friends, or my spouse and partner. They won't feel comfortable with themselves if I suddenly change drastically.
Because if, let's say, they're not wanting to lose weight, but they're all of a sudden this differential in you changing your identity,
or how you eat,
your eating patterns, your life patterns of now exercising and being outside and all those things, that becomes quite a differential from the way that the two of you have been in a relationship or within your family. How the siblings may feel. There's so many different kinds of secondary gains that come up to the emotional aspects of weight loss.
And that's the benefit of exploring all this with a practitioner. They'll ask you things, or ask it in a way that you never would have been able to on your own, and make those connections that are really often hidden to us.
And what I love about, on one hand, there is like the steps and the doing, and and what you're doing with regard to your food, your exercise, your movement, your daily lifestyle, and all of those things. There is the medical aspects. There is the cognitive aspects. We're seeing, programs like Noom and other things that, like, awareness and self-awareness is important, but using the tapping to really tune into your energy system and really tune in to shift the emotions around your relationship with yourself and food and eating, just such an important aspect.
Thanks for joining us today at EFT Nation. And remember that you can find show notes and previous episodes at EFTtappingtraining.com.